History likes to teach us that millions of Africans were forced on the slave ships, and when they arrived in the Americas, they had absolutely nothing. They were completely dependent on their captors just to stay alive. But that's not true. Before they were forced into cargo holds, black women braided survival directly into their hair. This is not a story about a side dish. This is a story about how captive black folks smuggled Western African plants across the Atlantic Ocean. This is the story about how we engineered our own survival and laid the groundwork for Southern agriculture. So join us today while we discuss the true history of okra. This is One Mic Black History. If you love stories like this, you can find more stories like this at onemichistory.com. Join us in my Substack. And without further ado, let's get started. To understand what happened, you have to look at the Middle Passage. The European enslavers thought that they had complete control. They had stripped enslaved people of their clothes and their freedom, but Western African women understood the reality of being taken from their homes. They knew that they were being taken to a hostile place. So before they marched along the coast, mothers took seeds of okra and rice and melon and physically wove them deep into the braids of their own hair and the hair of their children. They smuggled drought-resistant, heat-resistant seeds across the Atlantic Ocean. But the slave trade also had a massive blind spot. See, European slave ship captains were sailors. They weren't farmers. They had no idea how to keep captive Africans alive during the brutal months-long journey across the ocean. To protect their investment and keep people alive in the cargo hold, the captains were forced to buy massive supplies of African crops from African merchants before they set sail. So they bought tons of okra and yams and black-eyed peas. The captors literally paid to transport the exact seeds and crops that black folks would later use to survive. When these ships landed in places like South Carolina and the Caribbean, the European captors faced another problem. History books like to call them planters and pioneers, but in reality, they were capitalists, they were merchants, they were aristocrats. They had no idea how to farm. They brought English seeds of wheat and barley and oats, but in the brutal, humid, malaria-filled swaths of the Americas and the Caribbean, those European crops immediately died in the mud. The white colonialists faced starvation because they did not know how to live off the land in a subtropical climate. But enslaved folks didn't panic. They planted okra and rice and melon seeds that they had smuggled. While European crops died, African crops thrived. See, the white establishment looked at the okra plant and saw a slimy weed, but black cooks looked at okra and saw a way to survive. The white story will tell you that enslaved cooks were just thrown random scraps into a pot, hoping for the best, but that is an insult to their intelligence. Okra contains melanage. When you slice into it and boil it, that slime acts as a natural thickener. Black cooks use that specific chemical reaction to stretch every single worthless piece of meat, that pig feet, that discarded neck bone, into a massive pot of water and turn it into a thickened stew. This wasn't just about flavor, it was about survival. Without okra, you would just have a hot, watery broth that provides zero energy. With okra, it becomes a heavy meal. That single pot can feed 20 exhaustive people after a 14-hour shift in the cane fields. While the men that history claimed to be planters struggled, the enslaved folks figured out how to keep their people alive. Eventually, white planters tried to cut their costs. They realized that it was expensive to keep feeding enslaved people, so they allowed enslaved folks to grow their own food. But here's the rub. They handed enslaved folks the absolute worst piece of land on the far edges of the plantations and told them, grow your own food. These plots were called provision grounds. The planters thought that they were being ruthless, but black folks used this neglect to their advantage. Because European crops died in the swamp, these planters assumed that the land was useless. But okra thrived in this exact muddy terrain that the planters had abandoned. Black women planted those seeds that they had smuggled and grew a massive surplus of food. By the 1800s, enslaved and free black folks were harvesting these surplus, walking into places like the French market in New Orleans and completely dominating the food trade. The French and Spanish colonial elite did not know how to grow food for themselves in the Louisiana swamp. As a result, the wealthiest of white people in the city became entirely dependent on the exact crop that black folks were growing out of the mud. Black women set up stalls and extracted cash from the pockets of the elite every single day. And they used those profits to form an underground economy where they bought real estate, funded their communities, and sometimes purchased their own freedom. So the establishment couldn't rebrand okra the same way they did oxtail. It was too obviously black. It was too obviously African. As the decades passed, though, European palates wanted a rich, heavy stews that black cooks had created, but they complained about the slime. They wanted the soup, but they wanted to strip the African plant out of the pot. So white chefs and Southern aristocrats started writing cookbooks claiming that okra was optional. They replaced it and promoted two alternatives: the French dark roux, which was a mixture of toasted flour and animal fat, and the Native American file powder, made from grounded sassafras leaves individually sold by Choctaw women in the French market. White culinary elites took Native American ingredients and European cooking methods specifically to bypass okra. They pushed aside the exact plant that kept them from starving early in the 1800s. But here's the ultimate piece of arrogance. They kept the name. See, the word gumbo is not French, it's not Spanish. It comes from the Western African Bantu word kinigumbo. Kinigumbo roughly translates to one thing: okra. You cannot have gumbo without okra, because okra is exactly what the word means. They stole the African word to sell a dish while actively trying to write the plant that it was named after from the dish. But the final blow wasn't just erasing the ingredient. It was taking the recipe and trying to make it their own. The mainstream push to claim Creole in Southern cooking officially kicked off at the 1884 World's Cotton Centennial Exposition in New Orleans. White businessmen realized that the city's unique food wasn't just local taste. It was a massive tourist attraction that they could make a lot of money from. They realized that they just needed their own recipes before original creators could profit from them. So white writers and publishers rushed to kitchens of aging cooks, and they wrote down lifelong recipes and cooking secrets before the women died. A few years later, they published them in a massive national distributed book called the Picayune Creole Cookbook. They completely stripped the black women's names from the pages. They copyrighted the recipes under white ownership, and they sold them to American public as white aristocrat invention of the Old South. They took black culinary survival tactics and rebranded them as high-end European cooking and turned them into a marketing brochure for the Old South. It was a move that generated untold millions of dollars for white publishing houses and restaurants and tourism boards, while the black women that actually created the food never saw a penny. In the end, we are constantly being told that black history is a timeline of passive victims waiting for mercy. We're taught that enslaved people simply endured the violence until white morality decided to free them. Okra destroys that lie by itself. Our ancestors did not arrive here empty-handed. They smuggled seeds in their hair and forced their own survival on a system expressly designed to work them till death. They built an economy out of the swamp, funded their own liberations, and laid the actual foundation of Southern American agriculture. So the next time you sit down for a bowl of gumbo, you don't see a Southern classic. You need to look past the cookbooks, look past the marketing, and look at physical proof of Black genius. You see the brilliance of Black women who braided the blueprint directly into their hair, crossed the Atlantic Ocean, and built a culinary empire literally out the mud. Thank you. This has been One Mic, Black History. I'm your host, Country Boy. This has been the story of Okra. So, I don't know, I like this. I enjoy dispelling myths that people have about Black history and continuing to show these things from an angle that people don't expect. I would like to thank all my financial contributors. I love you all. Without you, none of this could be possible. If you want to deep dive more into these stories, to learn more about these stories, please join me in my Substack. Thank you all for your support. I love you all. Peace.